Alright, this is Mark chapter 5 in the MacArthur Study Bible. So let's begin. Alright, the first section is whenever Jesus casts out demons and they're cast into swine. Alright, then they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of Gadarenes, I think that's how you say it. And when he came out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one could bind him, not even with chains, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken into pieces, and neither could anyone tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshipped him, and he cried out with a loud voice and said, What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you, by God, that you do not torment me. For he said to him, Come out of the man, unclean spirit. And then he asked, What is your name? And he answered, saying, My name is Legion, for we are many. Also he begged him earnestly that he would not send them out of the country. Now a herd of large swine was feeding there near the mountains. So all the demons begged him, saying, Send us into the swine, that we may enter them. And at once the Lord gave them permission. Then the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine. There were about 2,000. And the herd ran violently down the steep place into the sea and drowned in the sea. So those who fed the swine fled, and they told it in the city and in the country. And when they went out to see what it was that had happened. And then they came to Jesus and saw the one who had been demon-possessed and had the legion, sitting and clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. And those who saw it told them how it happened to him who had been demon-possessed, and about the swine. And then they began to plead with him to depart from their region. And when he got into the boat, he who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might be with him. However, Jesus did not permit him, but said to him, Go home to your friends, and tell them what great things the Lord has done for you, and how he has had compassion on you. And he departed and began to proclaim it in the Decapolis, all that Jesus had done for him, and all marveled. Okay, let's go through this story here. So it starts with Jesus and the disciples coming to the other side of the sea, which would be the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee, in the country of the Gadarenes. Yeah, I guess that's how you say it, Gadarenes. And the preferred reading in Mark is Gerasenes rather than Gadarenes. And it most likely refers to the small town of Gersa, or Kersha, or Kersi, maybe, which was located midway on the eastern shore. And country of refers to the general region that included Gersha and was under the jurisdiction of the city of Gadara, which was located some 6 miles southeast of the Sea of Galilee. And this is probably why Luke referred to the region as the country of the Gadarenes. But anyway, that's where they went to. And when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. Yeah, out of the tombs of a man. Now Mark mentions only one of the demon-possessed men, which was probably the more prominent of the two. In Matthew, 2 men are mentioned. It's the same story in Matthew 8, but 2 are mentioned instead of just 1. So here it's just 1 instead of 2. Alright, yeah, but probably the more prominent one of the two. It's just mentioned here, maybe. Yeah. And the tombs were common dwelling places for the demented of that day. Yeah, common dwelling places for the demented of the day. I guess where the demented, would hang out or whatever, or dwell. But the tombs were the burial chambers. They were burial chambers carved out of rock hillsides on the outskirts of town. If the man and his possible companion were Jews, for whom touching dead bodies was a great defilement, living in such an area was just an added torment. Yeah, but these guys, more specifically this one guy out of the two, had an unclean spirit, and this refers to the demon who was controlling the man. Such spirits in themselves were morally filthy and caused much harm for those whom they possessed. Yep. And nobody could bind this man, not even with chains. And he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but the chains get pulled apart by him, and shackles get broken into pieces. Yep, multiple negatives are used here in the Greek, in the Greek text to emphasize this man's tremendous strength, or I guess the demon that had the strength within the man, I guess, to not be bound by the chains and the shackles. Now, shackles, perhaps metal or perhaps in part a cord or a rope, they were just used to restrain the feet, and the chains were metal restraints for the rest of the body. Yep, but nobody could tame this demon-possessed man, this demoniac. So, even putting chains and shackles, which would be very hard to get out of, that didn't work. Alright, and also this demoniac, he was in the mountains and in the tombs. He was crying out and he was cutting himself with stones. So crying out describes a continual unearthly scream uttered with intense emotion, probably from the torment of the demon. And these stones were likely were rocks made of flint with sharp, jagged edges. Yeah. So the demon, was causing this man to, hurt himself and cut himself. Yeah. Or maybe he was doing it out of agony from being possessed. I don't know. Yeah, maybe. But then, when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran out and worshipped him, along with his other buddy. But, as I said, just mentions him here. And he cried out with a loud voice and said, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" Yeah, now, what have I to do with you? That's a common expression of protest. Yeah, Son of the Most High God. Now, the demons knew that Jesus was deity, the God-man. Most High God was an ancient title used by both Jews and Gentiles to identify the one, the true and the living God of Israel, and to distinguish him from all false idol gods. And then the demon says, I implore you by God that you do not torment me. Yeah, Mark adds the "I implore you," which shows that the demon tried to have Jesus soften the severity of his inevitable fate. Yeah. Well, the inevitable fate ultimately is all the demons are going to get thrown into hell. So, but anyway. But then Jesus commands the demon to come out. And then he asks, "What is your name?" Now, most likely, Jesus asked this question, "What is your name?" He asked this in view of the demon's appeal not to be tormented. Moreover, he did not need to know the demon's name in order to expel him. Rather, Jesus posed the question to bring the reality and complexity of this case into the open. And I'm sure, obviously, he would have known that this demon is called Legion. So yeah, he just asked that question. So, but yeah, obviously he would know the answer. So because he's all knowing. All right. Yeah, but the term Legion, it's a Latin term. By then, common to Jews and Greeks, that defined a Roman military unit of 6,000, yeah, infantry men. So just a Roman military unit with 6,000 men. And such a name denotes that the man was controlled by an extremely large number of militant evil spirits, a truth reiterated by the expression, "for we are many." So it wasn't just one demon in this guy, it was many of them. Yep. And I guess even in the other guy too, who's not mentioned here. Alright. But then, the demon, and also he begged him earnestly that he would not send them out of the country. So the demon understood that Jesus had all the power over him and addressed him with an intense desire that his request be granted. Yeah, please. Yeah. Don't send us out of the country. Yeah, the demons wanted to remain in the same area where they've been exercising their evil powers. Yep, and Jesus permits them to go into the swine. Yeah. Now swine, now pigs were unclean animals to the Jews, so that the people tending this herd were either Gentiles or they were Jews unconcerned about the law. Yeah, but you have the dietary laws, of what animals he can eat and not eat. Yeah, he weren't supposed to eat pigs. So pigs were considered unclean. Yep. But anyway, that's what you had. Oh, there's a note about this, I think in Matthew 8. Let me turn there real quick. Yeah, sometimes I might be bouncing back and forth with these parallel passages in the other Gospels. Same passages in the other ones. So I'm still looking. Yep. And the demons begged Jesus basically for them not to be sent into the abyss, meaning the pit, the underworld, the prison of bound demons who disobeyed. And they knew that Jesus had the power and authority to send them there if he desired. Yeah. So. Yep. And Mark says that there's 2,000 pigs in this herd. And such a large herd of unclean animals suggests that the Gentiles dominated the region. It also suggests that the number of demons was large. Demon called itself Legion, so yeah, obviously there would be many. I don't know if it would have been exactly 6,000, but maybe. So, alright, but Jesus gave them permission to enter into the pigs and to destroy them. Yeah, to his sovereign purposes, of course. But the text offers no other explanation. And by doing this, Jesus gave the man a graphic, visible, and powerful lesson on the immensity of the evil for which he had been delivered. Yep. And then whenever the pigs and the demons enter into the swine, they violently run down the steep place into the Sea of Galilee, and then they all drown. Yep, and by doing that, but after that happens, I guess the people in the country that saw that, they told it in the city, nearby, that city that they went to, or that they were close to, that was mentioned in the beginning. Yeah, they told it in the city and in the country, and then they went out to see what all happened. And then they came to Jesus, and they saw that guy who had been demon-possessed and had the legion sitting and clothed in his right mind. Yeah, the man's restful condition was a strong contrast with his former restless, agitated state. And I guess you could say the same thing about the other guy, not mentioned here. All right, and he was in his right mind. He was no longer under the frenzied, screaming control of the demons. And so when the people saw that this guy was sitting and in his right mind, they were afraid, and those who saw it told them how it happened to him, who had been demon-possessed, and about the swine. And those may refer to both the 12 and the men who tended the pigs. They wanted people to know what had happened to the man and the pigs, and the relationship between the two events. But then they began to plead with Jesus to depart from their region. The residents of the region became frightened and resentful towards Jesus because of what had happened. They may have been concerned about the disruption of their normal routine and their loss of property. And they wanted Jesus and his powers to leave the area so no more such financial losses would occur. Maybe. But more compelling, however, was the reality that they were ungodly people, frightened by the display of Christ's supernatural power. Yep. So, but anyway. Alright, but then the former demoniac wants to follow Jesus, to go with him, but Jesus says, no, you need to go home to your friends and tell them the great things that God has done for you and how he has had compassion on you. Tell them what the Lord has done. And Jesus was referring to himself as God, who controlled both the supernatural and the natural worlds. Yep, and this guy, went and he proclaimed it in the Decapolis, all that Jesus had done, and all marveled. So, all right. Well, there you go. Now, the Decapolis was a league of 10 Greek-influenced cities, or Hellenized, Greek-influenced cities east of the Jordan River. Okay, yeah, 10. Yeah, you know, a decagon has 10 sides. Decade, 10 years. So, anyway. All right. But this guy goes to the Decapolis, tells the people what Jesus did, and they all marveled. I don't know if he also was taught, by Jesus. Well, it doesn't say here in the text, but I don't know if maybe he was also taught the gospel as well whenever Jesus gave him that command to go. So maybe so, and maybe this guy, in a way, could have been one of the first evangelists. Maybe, I don't know. Well, maybe. So, but I kind of wonder if those people marveled at what he said. I wonder if they ended up coming to believe in Jesus. I don't know. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, but you can marvel and yet still not believe. Alright, now you move on to the next story. Yeah, well, this story actually gets interrupted by another one, and then it goes back to the same story. Alright, but here's the first part of the story, and then there'll be another story in the middle of it, and then you'll get to part 2 with the first one. Alright, Jairus pleads for his daughter. Now, when Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live. And so Jesus went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him. All right, and then you have the interruption with this other story, which I'll get to in a second. So Jesus and the disciples, they returned to the northwest shore of Galilee. So they were on the east side in this first story in the chapter. Now they go back to the west side where they were originally. Yeah. All right, and then the rulers, but a great multitude gathered to Jesus. He was by the sea, and then one of the rulers of the synagogue comes, Jairus by name. Now the rulers of the synagogue, they presided over the elders of the local synagogues. Those elder groups made up of lay officials. They were in charge of arranging the services and overseeing other synagogue affairs. So, and Jairus would have been one of these guys. And when Jairus saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, and he begged him earnestly, saying, "My daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live." Yep, Jesus went with them, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him. All right, and now here's the other little story in the middle of this one. Now a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years, and had suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. And when she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd, and touched his garment. For she said, "If only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well." And indeed, the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, he turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to him, "You see the multitude thronging you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." Okay, so what do we got here? So this lady in this large crowd, as Jesus is going to heal Jairus' daughter, this lady has this issue of the flow of blood for 12 years. Now this denotes a chronic internal hemorrhage, perhaps from a tumor or other disease that caused this bleeding, I guess. But she suffered many things from many physicians. Now in New Testament times, it was a common practice in difficult medical cases for people to consult many doctors and receive a variety of treatments. And the supposed cures were often conflicting and abusive, and many times made the ailment worse, not better. And Luke, the physician, in Luke 8, suggested the woman was not helped because her condition was incurable. Okay. Yep. So really it seemed hopeless, really, for this woman to be healed by the looks of it. Yeah, but when she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. And she said, if only I may touch his garment, if only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well. And the woman's faith in Jesus' healing powers was so great that she believed even indirect contact with him through his garments would be enough to produce a cure. Yep. And immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. Fountain of blood, the source of her bleeding. Basically the area in her body, I guess, where the bleeding starts, where it comes from. So fountain of blood was dried up, source of her bleeding, with an analogy to bring to the origin of a spring. Yeah. Yep. That, all the bleeding that she had for so long, yep, finally stopped. Yep, she was cured. And then Jesus, immediately knew in himself that power had gone out of him. Christ's power, his inherent ability to minister and work supernaturally, proceeded from him under the conscious control of his sovereign will. So yeah, as it says, he knew that his healing power, went out of him. And then he says, "Who touched my clothes?" Now, he asked this question not out of ignorance, because of course he knew who did it, but he said this so that he might draw the woman out of the crowd and allow her to praise God for what had happened. But then the disciples were like, you see this multitude thronging you all around you? Probably with Jesus being in a crowd, probably people could have been bumping into him, maybe. Yeah, so the disciples like, you see these people? And then you say, "Who touched me?" Yeah, but anyway, he looked around to see who had done it, to see her who had done this thing. The woman, was fearing and trembling. Yeah, because, the woman with this issue of blood, she would have been ceremonially unclean. So, and then, technically, if you had an issue like this and you touched somebody else, technically that person would become unclean also. Yeah, but not with Jesus. Yeah, Jesus not only was still clean, but he did clean ultimately. Yep. And Jesus comes to this woman. She falls down. Yep. Well, she comes to Jesus and she tells him the whole truth about what she did. And then he says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." Now, Jesus' public statement concerning the faith and its results. Yeah, that's his statement. Yep. And Jesus made her whole, and it indicates that her healing was complete. Yep. And it's also the same Greek word often translated as to save. And it is the normal word for saving from sin, which strongly suggests that this woman's faith also led to spiritual salvation. So not only was she healed from her physical disease, but also her spiritual disease of sin. Yep. All right, but that's what happened. And now you get to Jesus arriving at Jairus' house. All right, while he was still speaking, some came from the ruler's house, the ruler of the synagogue's house, who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not be afraid, only believe." And he permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And then he came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue and saw tumult and those who wept and wailed loudly. And when they came in, he said to them, "Why make this commotion and weep? The child's not dead, but sleeping." And they ridiculed him, but when he had put him outside, he took the father and the mother of the child and those who were with him, Peter, James, and John, and he entered where the child was lying. And then he took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha kumi." I don't know if I said that right, but that means, and it's translated, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years of age, and they were overcome with great amazement. But he commanded them strictly that no one should know about it, and said that something should be given to her to eat. All right. So they get to, so while Jesus is still speaking after that woman got healed, some people come from Jairus' house and say that his daughter is dead, so why trouble the teacher any further? But Jesus heard that word, and he tells Jairus, don't be afraid, only believe. And this verb is a command from the present continuous action urging Jairus to maintain the faith he had initially demonstrated in coming to Jesus. So, he came to Jesus and, asked, if she would be healed. So he had faith that Jesus could heal his daughter. But now he heard that his daughter is dead, so Jesus is telling him to still have faith ultimately. Don't lose the faith that you demonstrated. You need to continue to have faith in him. And Jesus knew that there was no other proper response to Jairus' hopeless situation, and he was confident of faith's outcome. All right. Then he permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John. Now, this is the first time Mark gives special status to these 3 disciples. Now, Scripture never explains why these men were sometimes allowed to witness things that the other disciples were excluded from, but the trio did constitute an inner circle within the 12. Even the Greek grammar implies this inner grouping by placing their 3 names under one definite article. So, and then he came to the house of Jairus, and he saw tumult and those who wept and wailed loudly. In that culture, a sure sign that death had occurred. You would have weeping and wailing. Because burial followed soon after death, it was the people's opportunity to mourn publicly. And the wailing was especially loud and mostly from paid mourners. Paid mourners. Paid mourners. I think Matthew has something on that. Let me see. Just a second. Let me go. So. Alright, and then also you would have, and then in Matthew it says that Jesus saw the flute players and the noisy crowd wailing. Now, typical fixtures at the time of mourning in that culture. And the crowd at a funeral usually included professional mourners, women whose task it was to wail plaintively while reciting the name of the departed one as well as the loved ones who died recently. And the result was a noisy and chaotic din. So it was common to have paid mourners at this time. Okay. Alright, but anyway, Jesus says, why make all this commotion and weep? Girl's not dead, but sleeping. Now, whenever Jesus said this, this is just a figurative expression. Jesus meant that the girl was not dead in a normal sense because her condition was temporary and would be reversed. So, ultimately she would not stay dead. So in a way, if she would not be staying dead, then therefore I guess you could say she's asleep because he's about to ultimately wake her up by raising her from the dead. Okay, but whenever he said that, they ridiculed him. Now this could more literally be translated as they laughed him to scorn, or they were laughing in his face. They understood Jesus' words literally, and they thought that they were absurd. So ridiculed most likely refers to repeated bursts of laughter aimed at humiliating the Lord. So, this is ridiculous. Yeah. And this reaction, although shallow and irreverent, it indicates the people were convinced of the irreversible nature of the girl's death, and it underscores the reality of the miracle that Jesus was about to do. Yep, and I guess it also shows their unbelief. And so Jesus puts them all outside, but he takes the father and the mother, yep, and then the three that were with him, Peter, James, and John. So now this was an emphatic, forceful expulsion which showed Christ's authority and was done because of the disbelieving mourners. Yeah, the disbelieving mourners had disqualified themselves from witnessing the girl's resurrection. Yep, they didn't believe in him. I mean, they made fun of him when laughed at him whenever he said what he said. Yep, and so they disqualified themselves from seeing the resurrection. Yeah, but the family and the disciples would get to see it. Yep, he entered where the child was lying, and then he says, Talitha Kumi. Now, Mark is the only gospel writer who records Jesus' original Aramaic words. So, yeah, these words are in Aramaic. Talitha is a female form of lamb or youth. Kumi is an imperative that means arise. Yep, a command. So basically, youth, little girl, or arise. Yep. As in other such instances, Jesus addressed the person of the one being raised, not just a dead body. Yeah, whenever he raised Lazarus from the dead, he said, Lazarus, come forth. Yeah, address the person. Now, I don't know what this little girl's name was. Yeah, it doesn't say. But anyway. But immediately the girl arose and walked, and she was 12 years old. And they were overcome with great amazement. But he commanded them strictly that no one should know it. Knowledge of this miracle could not be completely withheld, but Jesus did not want news of it to spread until after he had left the area, because he knew such news might cause many Jewish opponents in Galilee to seek him out and kill him prematurely when it's not his time yet. And he also wanted to be known for bringing the gospel, not simply as a miracle worker. And Jesus was no doubt concerned that the girl and her parents may not be made the center of undue curiosity and sensationalism. Yep, so anyway. Yeah. But then he commands the people, to give the girl something to eat. But that's actually the end of Mark 5. So, alright. But you just have some more of the miracles being done. Yeah, Jesus has the power over demons and the power over death. Yep. Got power over sin and death. Yep, and definitely showed that in his resurrection. Yep, amen. And I'm going to say this real quick, but I just want to say it, but in the first part of this chapter about the Jesus casting out the demons, there was an old parody I had on that on that story. Yeah, and I might add it back on YouTube, so stay tuned maybe. And then there's another one that I had about that story of Jesus raising the girl from the dead. Yeah, I just have to re-record it, so I don't know when, but it may not be anytime soon. Maybe further down the road, Lord willing. But there's been a few parodies that I had with this chapter. So I haven't done the woman healed of the bleeding, but anyway. So, all right, but I just wanted to throw that in there. So, but awesome chapter. And I guess just, showing in the last two, the importance of having, the faith in Jesus. And then I kind of wonder, if Jairus ended up getting saved because of his faith in Jesus after his daughter got healed. Yeah, maybe so. I don't know. So, all right. All right, well, that's the end of this chapter, and Lord willing, I'll get to Mark 6 another time. And until then, may the grace of the Lord Jesus be with you, and the fellowship of his Holy Spirit be with you all. God bless you.